The irony wasn't lost on me, not even in the beginning, though I buried it under layers of self-deception so thick they felt like truth. My name is Chloe, and for 12 years, I was married to David. David, with his kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed, and a soul so gentle it seemed almost ill-fitted for the harshness of the world. We met in college, two bookish introverts who found solace in each other's quiet company. Our love wasn't a wildfire, it was a carefully tended garden, predictable, safe, and blooming with a familiar, comforting beauty. David was a high school history teacher, adored by his students for his passionate, slightly awkward lectures on the Roman Empire. I worked as a graphic designer, freelancing from our cozy suburban home. We wanted children, but after years of trying and unexplained silence, we had settled into a peaceful, if somewhat lonely, duality. Our life was a series of pleasant routines: Saturday morning pancakes, shared silence over coffee, his hand always finding mine in a movie theater. Then, there was Jake Morrison. The name alone used to make David flinch, a subtle, almost imperceptible recoil I only noticed later, when I was looking for cracks. Jake entered our lives not as a person, but as a spectre from David's past, resurrected at our 10-year college reunion. The reunion was David's idea. He thought it would be fun, a chance to see how everyone had grown. I saw him tense up as soon as we walked into the hotel ballroom, his gaze snagging on a broad-shouldered man holding court near the bar, his laugh too loud, too confident. That was Jake. David tried to steer me away, but it was too late. Well, I'll be damned. Davy Henderson. Jake's voice boomed across the room. The use of the boyish, diminutive Davy was like a slap. David stiffened beside me. Look at you, a real grown-up. What followed was an excruciating 15 minutes. Jake clapped David on the back with a force that staggered him. He regaled me, Chloe the oblivious wife, with tales of their high school days, tales I'd never heard. He spoke of David's cute little stutter and debate club, how he'd helped David toughen up by putting his gym locker combination on the bulletin board, the time he'd accidentally tripped him in the cafeteria, sending a tray of spaghetti flying. Each story was delivered with a jovial, nostalgic grin, framed as harmless boyhood pranks. David stood there, a tight, wounded smile on his face, muttering, "It was nothing, really, and water under the bridge, Jake." I felt a surge of protective anger. My gentle David, bullied. I squeezed his hand and gave Jake my iciest smile, extracting us as quickly as I could. In the car home, David was quiet. He was a jerk then, he's a jerk now, he finally said, staring out the window. Some people never change. I spent the night fuming at this caricature of a man, this relic of cruelty who had dared to hurt my husband. The next week, Jake sent David a friend request on social media. David showed it to me, his finger hovering over the ignore button. Maybe he's trying to apologize, I said, a naive part of me believing in adult redemption. Maybe it's time to bury the hatchet. David, ever acquiescent, reluctantly clicked accept. "If you think so," he murmured. That was the first thread pulled. Jake began to appear online. His profile was a curated gallery of success: Jake on a yacht, Jake closing a big real estate deal, Jake at the gym, his physique a testament to discipline David had never possessed. He started commenting on my posts, innocuously at first. "Great photo, Chloe," on a picture of a sunset I'd taken. Then, "You have a real eye for design," on a project I'd shared. It felt good. David appreciated me, but his praise was quiet, assumed. Jake's was public, effusive. He began to message me directly, always with a plausible reason. He was thinking of rebranding his real estate business and loved my aesthetic. Could he pick my brain? As a professional courtesy, of course. Our conversations started with fonts and color palettes but quickly drifted. He'd ask about my day. He'd listen, or at least type, with an intensity David seemed to have lost in the daily grind. David's conversations were about lesson plans and the leaky faucet. Jake's were about dreams, travel, the world of possibilities. He was charming, self-deprecating about his past. "I was a real idiot in high school," he wrote once. "I've done a lot of work on myself. I hope David knows I'm genuinely sorry. I admire the man he's become." I found myself telling him things I hadn't told David in years, my creative frustrations, my fear that my life was becoming small, my quiet grief over the children we didn't have. David and I had stopped talking about it, the pain was too vast. But with Jake, I could pour it out, and he would send back a virtual hug, words of validation that felt like a balm. "You're so much more than you give yourself credit for, Chloe," he'd say. David is a lucky man. The comparison, a poison seed, began to sprout. David came home exhausted, grading papers, his spirit worn thin by the noble but draining work of shaping young minds. Jake's energy was boundless, his world one of glamour and deals. David's love was a steady, warm blanket. Jake's attention was a spotlight, thrilling and warm. The first time I saw Jake in person after the reunion was for a business lunch to discuss his logo. I told David, who just nodded, absorbed in preparing a test. "Have fun," he said absently. Jake was even more magnetic in person. He focused on me entirely, his blue eyes never leaving mine. He complimented my ideas, my wit, my dress. He paid the bill despite my protests. As we left the restaurant, his hand brushed the small of my back, a gesture of casual possession that sent a current through me. I told myself it was nothing, but it was everything. The secret messages grew longer, more frequent. I'd be cooking dinner while texting Jake under the guise of checking a work email. I'd lie awake next to David's sleeping form, the glow of my phone illuminating my face as I typed forbidden words. The guilt was a constant, low hum, but I silenced it with a new, intoxicating narrative. I was seen. I was desired. I had spent so long being David's caretaker, his quiet supporter, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be the center of someone's universe, even if that universe was a lie. The inevitable fight with David happened over something trivial, a missed bill payment. But it wasn't about the bill. It was about the chasm between us, a chasm I had been secretly widening for months. "You're just so passive, David," I shouted, throwing Jake's unspoken criticism into the space between us. "The world happens to you. Don't you want more?" He looked at me, wounded and confused. "I have what I want, Chloe. I have you. I have my work. What more is there?" His contentment felt like an insult. That night, I messaged Jake. "I can't do this anymore." He called me immediately. "Meet me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just meet me. Let me hold you. You deserve to be happy." The affair turned physical that week. It was in a generic hotel room that smelled of artificial citrus, a far cry from the warm, familiar comfort of my home. It was passionate, urgent, and filled with the desperate energy of stolen things. In Jake's arms, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. I felt dangerous, powerful, chosen. He worshipped my body, whispered promises of a future filled with adventure and luxury, a future where I wouldn't be a sideline's wife but a queen. He painted David as a weak, stagnant man holding me back from my true potential. And I, in my selfish delirium, believed him. For 3 months, I lived a double life. I became a skilled actress, lying to David with a cold proficiency that now horrifies me. I was working late, meeting a client, having girls' nights. David, trusting to a fault, believed me. His unwavering trust only fueled my resentment. Why wasn't he fighting for me? Why was he so easy to deceive? The climax was as brutal as it was cliché. I'd told David I was visiting my sister for the weekend. Instead, I was with Jake at a waterfront restaurant 2 towns over. Of course, fate, or perhaps the universe's sense of poetic justice, intervened. One of David's fellow teachers, Mr. Peterson, was there celebrating his anniversary. He saw me with Jake, my hand in his across the table, my head thrown back in a laugh. I never laughed with David anymore. David was waiting for me when I returned Sunday evening. He wasn't crying. He was preternaturally calm, sitting at our kitchen table, the heart of our home now a courtroom. "Mr. Peterson saw you," he said, his voice flat. "With Jake Morrison." All the lies, the carefully constructed alibis, crumbled in an instant. I could have denied it, made an excuse, but a perverse part of me, the part that had been whispering Jake's narrative, wanted it out. I was tired of hiding. So I confessed, not with remorse, but with a defiant, wounded pride. I vomited out all my grievances, his quietness, his lack of ambition, our boring life, my feeling of being unseen. I used the words Jake had given me. "I need someone strong, David. I need a real man." The look on his face. It wasn't just hurt. It was a demolition. It was the shattering of every foundational truth he'd believed in about us, about himself. He just listened, his face growing paler, his kind eyes turning hollow. When I finished my cruel litany, he stood up slowly. "Jake Morrison," he said, the name a whisper of pure undiluted pain. "All those years ago, he made me feel small and worthless. He made school a nightmare. And now he's finally won. He took the only good thing I ever had away from me. And you helped him do it." He didn't yell. He didn't beg. He walked to our bedroom, packed a single bag, and left. The silence that followed was the loudest, most terrible sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my own emptiness. In the chaotic, euphoric rush that followed, I moved in with Jake. He was triumphant, telling me I'd made the right choice, the strong choice. We were a whirlwind. Fancy dinners, weekend getaways, a torrent of social media posts proclaiming our unexpected second chance at love. I ignored the comments from mutual acquaintances, the silent judgment. I was living a romance novel, but cracks in the fantasy began to show almost immediately. The spotlight that had felt so warm began to feel interrogative. Jake's charm was conditional, reserved for public display or for when I was compliant. His need for control, once disguised as decisiveness, emerged. He criticized my friends, my spending, the way I decorated his condo. My place needs to look a certain way for clients, babe, he'd say, removing a quirky vase I'd bought. My opinions, once so valued, became overthinking. The first time I saw his temper was over a misplaced phone charger. It wasn't directed at me, but at an inanimate object he threw against the wall, shattering it. The violence of the gesture froze my blood. Geez, relax, he said, seeing my face. It's just a thing. But I remembered David, who had never so much as raised his voice in 12 years. The bullying pastime wasn't just in the past. I saw it in how he spoke about his business rivals, about waiters who were too slow, about anyone he perceived as beneath him. The charming nemesis narrative he'd sold me began to curdle. One night, after a few drinks, he reminisced about high school again, but the veneer of regret was gone. Man, your ex was such a pushover, he chuckled. So easy to mess with. You could just see him wanting to cry. It was hilarious. The laugh died in my throat. I saw not the charming rogue, but the cruel boy. And I saw myself, not as a liberated heroine, but as his ultimate accomplice. I had become the vehicle for the final, most devastating bully of David's life. The epiphany, when it came, was quiet and devastating. I was organizing Jake's home office and found a stack of old paperwork. Among them was a faded, framed photo. It was a group shot of his high school football team. And there, in the back row, was a young Jake, his arm around the neck of a skinny, bespectacled boy in a too-big jersey, grinning while the other boy winced in clear discomfort. The boy was David. Jake had kept it, a trophy. I dropped the frame as if it were on fire. In that moment, the last veil of self-deception burned away. This wasn't love. This was conquest. I wasn't a soulmate. I was the final prize in a game of humiliation that had started 2 decades ago. David wasn't weak. He was a man of profound strength who had chosen kindness in a world that rewarded Jake's brand of aggression. And I had betrayed that kindness for a glittering illusion. I left Jake that afternoon. There was no dramatic confrontation. I simply packed my things while he was at a showing. I left the key on the counter and turned off the spotlight for good. The aftermath is a barren landscape. David, rightly, wants nothing to do with me. The divorce was swift and silent. I heard through the grapevine that he took a sabbatical and is traveling, trying to heal from the twin betrayals of his past and present. I hope, with every fractured piece of my soul, that he finds peace and a love that is deep and true, the kind he always deserved. As for me, I am alone. The friends I neglected have moved on. My family is deeply disappointed. I live in a small apartment, and the silence here is different from the one in the house I shared with David. That was a silence of companionship. This is a silence of consequence. I started therapy, trying to understand the hollow parts of me that were so susceptible to the flash of a spotlight, that confused cruelty for strength, and that sacrificed